Hi everybody, I can see that people are starting to come into the webinar now, so we'll just get started. My name is Lindsay Chalmers, I'm the Development Manager at Community Land Scotland. Just a few housekeeping things first. Could you put the housekeeping slide back up again, Sarah? So in terms of housekeeping today, I'm just to let you know the session is being recorded and it'll be available on our YouTube channel probably early next week. Closed captioning is enabled if you'd like to have captioning. If you would like to address your questions to the speakers through the Q&A function, that would be great. If you've got any questions you want to direct to a particular person, just name them in the Q&A and I will make sure they're directed to them. So the session will last for 90 minutes from 2 to 3:30, depending on the number of questions. We might finish a bit earlier, we might run right up to 3:30 p.m. So this event is the latest in our series called Meet the Pioneers, and you can see all of the other ones on our YouTube channel covering a whole range of different subjects from renewables to housing to working with young people and heritage assets. I should also flag up that we have our annual conference on the 2nd and 3rd of June this year, which is going to be a really exciting event with a fantastic agenda. You can find more information on our website about that. But today we're going to be focusing on community ownership in villages. We know villages are a bit of a hotspot for community ownership, with many communities using community ownership to save vital services or to develop new services such as housing and community centres. So we have three very varied speakers today from Findhorn Village Conservation Company. And then we have Richard Fyfe from Culbokie Community Trust. And finally, we have Jennifer Chapman from Palnackie Village Shop Limited in Dumfries and Galloway. So I'm just going to hand over soon to Cathy Lowe, who's from Findhorn. Cathy is the Secretary of the Conservation Company. She has a background in learning and development, including as a UK training manager for Amazon, which I'm sure brings many skills that are useful to the community company. She's a busy person with 4 grown-up children, 3 grandchildren, and a black lab. She has a holiday let in her garden and swims in the sea every day. So where she finds the time to be Secretary of the Conservation Company, I don't know. Her roles with the organisation really focus on grant funding and project management of the motorhome stopover, dunes track and public toilets, which Cathy will tell you more about. So I'll just hand over to Cathy now and invite her to come onto the screen.
Right, there we go. Hopefully you can all hear me, and now we can, I've got to share the screen, is that right? Share screen. Which one do we want? Just bear with me in case I get this wrong. You might find out everything. So are you seeing the right screen with the slideshow on that now?
Yeah, that's it. Looks
yeah,
Cathy.
Yeah, I'm seeing that. Great. Okay, now, okay. So Findhorn Village Conservation Company, we lovely village on the Moray Firth in the northeast of Scotland. We're very fortunate with, as I say, with our views and everything, very small, about 400 houses in the village. Unfortunately, 50% of them are holiday homes, but we're kind of working on that. Now, I'll just give very briefly how it began. I was not part of the Findhorn Village Conservation Company when they purchased the land, so I'm not the best person to speak about the purchase, but I can tell you what we've done since. So with a strong community backing, we purchased the land in 2016 through the Scottish Land Fund, through a bid with the then current landowner, Moray Estates. And this was little pockets of land all over the village, incorporated lanes, stripeleys as they're called here, parts of the foreshore, car parks, dune land, dunes tracks, just a real multitude of areas of land within and surrounding the village. In 2018, another milestone was reached when we purchased the Armstrong garages, which was a site bang in the middle of the village, which had 13 storage garages on it, corrugated iron, been there for forever. I remember my father-in-law parking his car in there, and I'm old already, so that shows you how long ago that was. So yeah, so that again, that was made possible for the Scottish Land Fund loans and donations. So that's kind of the two major pieces of land that we purchased. That then this map here is what we have for people to identify where they are when they're on the motorhome stopover or on the beach walks. So that's the land. You can see the roads, etc. But when we come on to, hope that's clear enough. Anything that's pink is what we own. It goes right up down to the low tide mark on the back shore there, onto the Moray Firth. So it's quite a substantial piece of land. There's not, it's not a lot of value in it, as in, what do you do with it? You know, for building houses, no. But we had two opportunities within our gift to raise income, which was just through the car parks. That was our only opportunity to raise income to support the management of the land. We've also then got the garages, which we rent out, which literally is a bit of a standalone project, and they cover themselves for their cost. We're a very small board. We've got a chairman, secretary, myself, and at the moment only 3 directors. I'm sure along with everybody else, it's always a challenge to try and get hold of directors to come on board, because it is quite a commitment. When we're in still quite a young stage of, okay, 2006, we're in year 7, but I think for community land, that's quite, we're still in the honeymoon period at the moment. So the journey, kind of just very quickly, 2011 was when they actually formed the charity. That was when the whole Armstrong Garages process began. Purchased the land 2016. We had a planning for real exercise in 2017, which went out to all the village to let us see what they were wanting and what we could do with the land that we had. We then purchased the garages. We then allowed overnight parking in the motorhomes with just honesty boxes, put you £10 in the box, which was fine for a start. And then we had our All Abilities path. And then, well, 2020, I don't think we need to see much about that, because that's what kind of created chaos throughout the country. 2021, we actually opened our stopover completely, which I'll come on to in more detail in a minute. And then 2001, again, we leased one of the toilet blocks because the council were going to shut them both, so we'd have no facilities for toilets in the village. And then in 2022, we managed to get to do a community asset transfer for the 2 toilet blocks in the village. So they're now under our ownership. Well, this is a fancy bit. My daughter did this bit, so I hope it works. Right. 2002, the caravan site in the village shut to tourers, caravans and tents. So that left no availability for motorhomes or touring people on tour to stay in the village of Findhorn. So 2016, I say we bought the land, and we also at the same time were bequeathed £50,000 to develop an all accessible path down the front of the bay from a local resident who unfortunately passed away. The path, the £50,000 was about a quarter of what we needed to build the path. So the rest had to be raised. Planning for real. And then 2018, as I said, we started our overnight parking in the West Beach car park, installed our honesty boxes, and we did very well. 30k money taking in 3 years. We thought this is great. And then Moray Council decided that no, you need to have a change of use to have a caravan park there, a motorhome stop over there. Now that was fine. We submitted that, but they came back with many restrictions on what we had to do. So they allowed us to continue on during COVID to run the motorhome with honesty boxes while we waited for planning permission to be approved. But one of the main things they said was a maximum number of motorhomes you can have is 21 at any one time, and they can only stay for 2 nights. When COVID restrictions were relaxed in the end of June, I think it was 2020, we woke up to 66 motorhomes in the car park, which you can see some of the pictures there. It wasn't the most attractive of things to wake up to in your village. But by October, we got our planning permission But that's where we then came across what we're going to do next to get this done. So we were very fortunate. We were able to raise funds to put in an AMPR barrier and booking system. And so that way we could manage and monitor the motorhomes to 21 to stay for no more than 2 nights. And it's all automated. So people book online, pay online, approach the barrier, recognizes their number plate, up pops the barrier. We can fold the barrier and let people in if need be. And also all the police and emergency vehicles are registered on our site so that they can access it at any time. So work started on the groundworks in February 21, and we took our first stay in May 21. So it was all hands to the pump to get it back up, to get it up and running in time. This is the work on the path. It took a longer time because of its location and the groundworks that had to be done and the surfaces to make sure it was met all ability requirements. We had, I think it was 4 or 5 different slipways that we had. Slipways had access to the water that we had to ensure these were maintained for either private or other organisations in the village. So that took a lot of work to get that sorted out. This is the garage site, a proposal, just one of our proposals to have at the moment. We're currently working on these ones here to make them, those 4 garages into 2 workshop studios. But as I'm sure everybody's finding, the cost of building materials is just going through the roof. So we are having to do a lot of thinking at the moment about that one. This is our motorhome stopover. As you see, beautiful location. Looks just at the back of the beach, and the toilet block is there for us that we use for our motorhomes. This is the motorhome bird's eye view, 21 spaces. We were able to identify, we had to, one of the conditions of Moray Council was we had to have 6 meters between each van and clearly delineated sites. And we used a product called EcoGrid and filled it in with a lighter gravel. And as you can see, it clearly demonstrates where to park your motorhome without affecting the land that it's sitting on. And it also protects erosion on the sand to stop with these heavy vehicles. It's not in this picture, but on the left there is now a waste disposal unit and a grey water waste disposal and fresh water that we now have. So that's what we are now. We're very fortunate in our first year of our motorhome site. We were awarded 5 stars, and we also got Aire of the Year from Campra. So we're very, very pleased with all that. What's next? We're refurbishing our toilet blocks. We've got 2 toilet blocks. One of them is nearly complete, and it's meant recladding them, re-roofing them, totally new sanitary ware. This one here is the north one, which will serve as the motorhome people as well as the beach. It's going to have a shower block on the back, and it's going to be connected to the mains, and it's going to be getting electricity. Again, we've been fortunate with funding from RTIF, Rural Tourism Infrastructure Fund, which has enabled us to do this. We've got 8 beach steps, which were built where the sea defences were put in at Findhorn. They are not in a good state. So we are in the process of raising funds to rebuild the steps there, trying to reuse as much of the wood as we can. But worst case scenario, they cost about 8,000 to 10,000 per step. So you can do the maths yourselves. In the long run, we would like to get a ward and development officer. At the moment, we're all volunteers. We have no staff. The development of the Armstrong Gorges is ongoing. We've also identified an area of land to do allotments, which is in the process of getting the plans drawn up for planning permission. I had no idea you'd need planning permission for an allotment, but I think that's the joy of working within a community project. You learn every day. And we've also got other potential community buyout. There's 2 ongoing we're looking at in the village at the moment. So we've had quite a busy 7 years. But kind of lesson learned, really, where possible, try and get as much time for planning and engagement. my big mistake with the motorhome part, I've got to put a path in for pedestrians. So just for that, to kind of just always look at all methods of access. We've had great working relationship with our contractors, whether it's the groundworks, electricians, builders, joiners, and getting that team together has been a real boom for us for when things have maybe not gone as we wanted. We've been able to have that flexibility with them. As you can't consult too much for within your villages. I think that's one of the key things, but you've also got to recognise you can't please everybody all of the time. And it's always going to cost more than you think. And then Moray Council, other service providers and local businesses within your reach, those relationships and connections and identifying people who you can phone or email when you get stuck with something, and somebody to be a pointer to point you in the right direction of who to go and ask. It's something that I think is vital, especially within Moray Council and High. And sometimes you just have to do it. You have to take the risk and just bite the bullet and do it. It's very frightening at times, but sometimes you just have to bite the bullet and get on with it and give it a go. It might not always work, but you can always try and fix it later. But it's full of potholes. Our disaster, as you can see from the lovely picture on the right, we had a lovely new surface put on our beach road, all lovely. And then one of these horrendous storms came and washed it out within 2 weeks. So that's an ongoing issue we have. We've now got to the bottom of it through trial and error, a lot of it, to identify the right surface, the right camber, the right drainage. So we're nearly there, and it's something that is an ongoing project, but we've also got to recognise it is a track. The smoother it is, the more boy racers you get, the faster people drive along it. So it's that balance of having it smooth enough that it's not taking the backside out of cars, but it's not encouraging people to be charging along the road where there's pedestrians, animals, horses, bikes, whatever you can think of. So our dream project, if and when we ever get it, and before I kind of retire from the conservation company, will be, we want to get disabled access, not just to the top of the beach, which this picture is taken from, but actually be able to take a wheelchair down, or somebody with limited mobility, all the way down so they can put their feet in the water. Now we're limited because of the sea defences, which are all rocks. So without the steps, it's very difficult to get down if you're able-bodied, but to get onto the back shore, it's nigh on impossible for somebody with limited mobility. So that is one of our projects. So I've rattled through that quite quickly, and I think questions are coming at the end. So I don't know if I've done my 10 minutes, Lindsay.
You've done perfectly, Cathy. Particularly given how many different things the conservation company has done over the years, you managed to fit it in very well.
I hope that could have just been busy.
Thanks, Cathy. I'm sure there'll be lots of questions coming up later. We're going to head across the Moray Firth now over to Culbokie. So we have Richard Fyfe from Culbokie Community Trust. Richard retired from his job as an environmental regulator with SEPA in 2021. He's active in the community and is a keen gardener, walker and cyclist. So I think our speakers today are showing us a common phrase in community land ownership that you should always ask the busiest person in the village if you want something done. I'm going to hand over to you now, Richard, and you can see your presentation is working perfectly there.
Right, thanks, Lindsay, and thanks, Cathy, for that very interesting presentation from Findhorn. As you said, we're not a million miles away from each other, certainly as the crow flies. Culbokie, small village on the Black Isle, just north of Inverness. I'm going to try and give you a little bit of a whistle-stop tour of our site and a little bit of the history of how we got here to the picture that you're seeing in the background here today. Back in 2011, when the Inner Moray Firth local plan was being reviewed by the local authority, some of us in the village started to get interested and involved. There was a small site of half a hectare identified as part of a larger site for housing that was for community use. there was no real plan from the local authority of how that community use would be implemented. They had suggested a church, a bank, a doctor's surgery, and I don't think any of those were actually feasible, but never mind, that's just the way it goes. But we'd identified that the village needed a heart, mainly because the village has grown up over a number of years and become a bit of a dormitory for Inverness and Dingwall surrounding area, but without any of the facilities you would normally expect of a village of this size, about 1,000 people roughly in the village. And that site that was identified in the local plan, we discovered in 2014 it came up for sale. That was the community site and the housing site that was next to it. In response to this, we formed the Culbokie Community Trust with a view to actually buying that land or taking hold of it. And we developed a community consultation and went through the right to buy application process because the site owner didn't want the site to be split up and sell the part to the community and part to the housing developer. They want to sell it as one job lot, but we wanted to buy the community half-hectare separately. So went through that process, community ballot. We achieved 81.6% in favour. That's of those who voted. 55% of people in the area voted in that ballot, and we were able to buy that site, half a hectare, as I said, in 2015, thanks to funding and support from Scottish Land Fund. There was something of a hiatus at that point because the development of the site really needed to be done in tandem with the housing site next door. I'll show you a slide in a minute that explains it a little bit more, but it was really difficult for us to develop it in isolation. And it took until 2018 that the housing part of it was sold, or at least at that point, Tulloch Homes were the preferred bidder for that land. And we realized that we had to seriously work with them and plan our project, and went through a huge process which involved community consultation, work with Tullochs and others as well to develop a plan. Don't worry about all the detail on the plan here, but it just gives you an idea of the level of detail that went into it in order to develop this. This is a more, wasn't the original plan. This is moved on a little. This is the main road through the village here. But just as an example of why we needed a partnership with the housing developer, the houses are sort of down below us on the south side here, and also next to the main road for some of the affordable houses. The local authority wanted all the access roads and pavements, etc., built as part of the development. So we couldn't have developed our site without having putting a pavement along the main road, improving the junction of the main road into the access, and also building of this road here. Now, there's no way we could have funded that, which would have certainly been well into six figures to make those improvements. But Tulloch Homes, as part of their development, carried out all of those works. Our original half hectare was the area which I'm trying to show with the mouse here, but Tulloch discovered that the lowest point in the site was this large white area here, which is the sustainable urban drainage that they have created. So I think they belatedly realized that water actually does flow downhill, and they need to put that at the lowest point on the site. So they bought that area from us and gave us a further area of land which actually extends beyond what you can see here, and included these 6 affordable houses here So we increased our land holding as part of that deal with Tulloch. We also got the improved infrastructure that was put in place. We then looked seriously at what we might do in terms of developing the houses, but I'll come back to that in a minute. What we were really interested in, this is the architect's impression of what we were going to develop in terms of a cafe on the site. Sorry, but the quality is not brilliant there in terms of the picture. Then, of course, as Cathy said, at that point, when we were busy working with Tulloch and they were ready to start on site, they'd literally mobilized their guys when COVID-19 struck, and then the world was shut down for 6 months or more. And in fact, it was best part of a year before Tulloch really got going on site due to the restrictions on them. So in the meantime, we continued working and we developed our own plans and achieved full planning consent for the site based on the plan that you saw a second ago. And Tulloch were able in 2021, following them actually starting on site, once they'd done part of it, they were able to hand that over to us. And after all that, going right back to 2011, when we started thinking about it, finally in 2021, we took control of part of the site. And then in 2022, we actually raised a small shelter building. I'll show you the photo. I think it was on the publicity, actually. I'll show you the photo of that in a second. So things have started to happen there. So the site, when we first took ownership of it or took control of it, looked a bit like the Battle of the Somme. It was the Suds Basin is just behind this lady here, Ebony, who's planting a tree over by the chap with the red boiler suit on. That's the Suds Basin over there. But as you can see, one of the first things we did was tree planting on site. And we got the kids from the local primary school involved in that, planting fruit trees as well as other trees on site to make a community orchard. Then with lots of community volunteers involved in helping to raise the shelter building, a bit like that movie with Harrison Ford, The Witness. This is us lifting it on the day. And then that's what we achieved in terms of the actual building itself, which has become really useful in terms of us gathering on site and just providing a focal point as part of the green. This was taken slightly before that as it was being built, but it gives you a little bit of an overview of what we've achieved. A natural play area on the bottom left-hand side. And some other bits and pieces there. Oh, and the table tennis just next to the shelter as well. It's greened up a bit since then, but we're still working on it. And the area just at the bottom of your screen has now been handed over to us as well, but it's still rather like the photo where the lady was planting the tree. It's a bit of a bog at the moment. But the houses that have been developed on there, these are actually the Tulloch ones, and just out of shot is the ones that were developed by Cairn. We actually sold an area of land to Cairn for them to develop the affordable housing. We recognised that our ability to actually do that was limited, and it was a better option for us to actually sell the land to them. So it's given us an asset in terms of the cash. But it handed over that. So we've ended up with 25 privately owned houses and 14 affordables on this site now. One of the really good things, Cairn did an official opening of it a few weeks back, and as we were wandering around with their chief executive, he had to ask one of his fellow people from Cairn which ones were the privately owned houses and which ones were the affordables. He couldn't tell the difference between them, which made a nice change to see the affordables looking at least like the normal privately owned houses. So where we're going now, site is owned by the community, and all the decisions have been taken through community consultation. Our priority is to develop toilets and cafe. There's an option of possibly of developing business units. We've got funding from HIE to do an options appraisal and business plan for that. We're looking to put in a pollinator bed in the new area we've just taken control of. We've got ongoing maintenance. We'll maintain that, so we have community volunteers doing that. We managed also to get some help from community payback for a few sessions of work there as well. And we need to take time to enjoy what we've done. Challenges have very much been around funding. When we first started out, there were a number of funding options, but these through the last number of years with the changes in funding have largely dried up. We're also not in a particularly deprived community, so we're not a priority for a lot of funders here in Culbokie. So we're having to divide things up and do things in a fairly piecemeal fashion to get our plans actually into reality. It does make it a lot harder work, and it makes it more expensive when you have to do in small slices rather than one large project. But that is a very whistle-stop tour of Culbokie Community Trust and how we've got through that process.
Thanks, Richard. Particularly good to hear about the affordable housing looking exactly the same as the other housing. It's not often that you hear that these days. Now going to move on to our final speaker. We're heading down to near the Solway first, Palnackie and Dumfries and Galloway, and we're going to hear from Jenny Chapman, who is the chair of the village shop. The shop is a mutual society originally purchased from a Scottish Land Fund grant. And they also have a cafe and a cottage, and the cottage has recently been renovated with Rural Housing Fund money and has turned into affordable housing. So I will let you tell the rest of the story, Jenny. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the previous presentations. That's really interesting. All right, my name's Jennifer Chapman. I'm going to talk a little bit about Palnackie Village Shop and what we've been doing, but I'll start by saying a little bit about Palnackie Village. Now, there seems to be a delay on moving. I don't know if my slide's going to move forward.
It'll probably just go eventually, like it does on the trial run.
You're right. Okay, well, I'll keep talking. No, it's not going. Right, so let me talk a bit about Palnackie. Palnackie is probably the smallest of the communities we've been talking about, in that we have about 100 households and only 250 people. And it was interesting hearing about half the cottages in the first village being holiday cottages. I think we have one holiday cottage in the village itself. So we are very, very much still a place where people live, not so much work. Most people would have to go out with the village to work, or we've got quite an elderly population, but it is very much a community where people live. We're on the banks of the River Aire, and in the past it was a port village, but as with so many things, the port is no longer really viable, and neither and we're facing a lot of challenges with other things. So there was a survey done in 2018 to look at ways forward for the village, and it identified 6 key community resources which were valued as giving character and life to Palnackie. I'm just going to stop the share a second, see if I can get that might have done it. Can you? I've now moved on to the other screen. Can you see the second screen?
I can see it, yes.
So stopping share seems to have worked. You can still see it, even though it does. I've clicked off share.
Zoom works in mysterious ways sometimes.
All right, so as long as you can see it, that's fine. So the key community resources that were identified, and all of these, now we're going too fast. All of these are under threat. I think it,
my colleague Sarah might be running it from her laptop. So.
Right, can we go back to the second slide if you're trying to run it? So the key resources were the primary school, which has a total of 9 students, so that's continually under threat. The pub, which faces a lot of challenges, the village hall, the port, the village shop, and the café. And what I'm going to talk about today are the village shop and the café. Right, well, I think I'm going to have to give up on the screen because it's either going into the wrong place or not moving at all. Okay, so the shop and cafe history. In the past, the shop and cafe were separate, privately run businesses. But in 2014, the owner of the shop decided they no longer wished to continue, and the shop was under threat of closure. The Willowtree Cafe, which was attached to the shop, was a popular little cafe and restaurant. But unfortunately, in 2017, the manager left to take a job away from the region, and there was no one wanting to take the rental over, so the cafe closed. So we were in a situation where the cafe was shut and the shop was under threat of closure. This was the only remaining shop in the village, having been multiple shops in the past when it was a thriving port. The community did not wish to lose its sole remaining shop, which was deemed vital for community cohesion and quality of life, as it provided a hub for the village, particularly the elderly, who would drop in often multiple times a day to have a chat with the person behind the desk. So in 2014, we set up the Palnackie Village Shop Mutual Society and took over the shop by the village. The premises remained the property of the previous owner, who lived behind the shop. Palnackie Village Shop Committee retained a part-time manager and ran the shop with them and a number of volunteers, paying rent to the owner. A visiting post office comes twice a week. The shop remained a focal point for the community for information, gossip, etc., though at this time the cafe remained closed. So the shop was important to the community, but it was an ongoing challenge to maintain its profitability and the number of volunteers after the first flush of enthusiasm. Around 2019, we were invited to a high-level consultation meeting by the Plunkett Foundation when they were redeveloping their policy for Scotland. Representatives from Scottish Land, the Lottery, the Scottish Government, etc. were all there. And at this, we were asked what they could do to better support community organisations. Our chair at the time did what she called her normal whinge about how you could only get money for new or innovative things, but that it was core funding that we needed to make things sustainable. It was an ongoing challenge to make the shop profitable. At this point, Scottish Land suggested we could buy the premises. This would mean we could take out the rent that we were paying to the landlord, and we could potentially get a rent from the attached house to support the business. Well, we had never thought that big. It was a bit of a light bulb moment for us. We didn't know at the time that the owner who lived behind the shop was interested in selling, but we came back to discover that actually he would love to sell. He wanted to sell up and retire somewhere else. So this was the next step for us. Purchasing the premises and raising money for the renovation was a lengthy and complex process, where the key things to getting funding was a good business plan. We were supported by Creetown Initiative to develop a business plan for the shop and the cafe, funded by a Stage 1 bid from Scottish Land Fund. Dumfries and Galloway Small Communities Housing Trust had undertaken a housing needs and demands assessment, which highlighted the need for family housing in the village, which supported our application. So in September 2019, we got an award from the Scottish Land Fund for purchase of the house, the shop and the cafe. And vitally, it included £12,000 for a part-time project officer. We found that getting this award was very straightforward as long as we followed their advice to the letter. We then also got funding from the Rural Housing Fund to refurbish the house. This funding is conditional on the house rent remaining affordable. So we now have an additional 3-bedroom family home within Palnackie Village to be let at a social rent level. Throughout this, support from the Buttle Parish Community Council has been vital. So what has all this meant for Palnackie? Well, being able to buy the shop and the associated café and house has supported the sustainability of the shop. It's still a challenge. It will be an ongoing challenge. It's a small community and about 40% of the community use the shop. But for those 40%, it is vital. It's provided a 3-bedroom affordable rental housing in a community where housing is really at a premium. There's always a long list of people wanting to move into Palnackie. We provide 7 part-time jobs in a village where there are very few jobs. And with a delay caused again by the COVID-19, we successfully opened Flounders Community Café, which serves as a real social hub for the village. It can go beyond just the dropping in to have a chat with the person behind the desk to actually hold events. We have clubs that meet there, a book club, a knit and natter. We have occasional evening events for villagers. We rent it out to people to hold parties or things like that. And we were awarded Dumfries and Galloway Café of the Year in 2021. So the café has been a real success. And I was asked to also reflect on what are some of the lessons been of this whole process. First of all, it's important to get the right support to draw up the business plan. We had Creetown Initiative who supported us after a tender process. The Scottish Land Fund were provided a grant to pay them as part of the stage 1 bid. And I think you'll find that the Scottish Land Fund and most large funders do understand the need for guidance for community groups in the setup stage, where the rest of us are all acting as volunteers. We would recommend building a grant for development worker into your main bid. This will help take the strain from the committee, the volunteer committee, if you get the right person. And again, this was some of the advice we got from Creetown Initiative. As the other speakers have said, it is absolutely vital to consult the community at all stages and to keep them informed. We included the community council at every step. We included all the shareholders of the shop. And of course, running the shop already, that was a good point for information about what our plans were. It's important to get the right model for your organisation. We went for a membership shareholder model because that means that the people who have bought in as shareholders have a stake in the organisation. And it's important for the committee to feel supported. Like the others, we have a relatively small committee who do an awful lot of work, but we have a much broader shareholder base who have bought into the ideas and the things that we're trying to achieve. It's important to join networks and use them. It's the only way to keep up to date when you're inevitably consumed by just keeping going day to day. It was being part of a network that allowed us to first find out about the options for buying the premises. It's important to keep your knowledge, to get your knowledge base right. You don't need to reinvent the wheel. You will find out people out there who know more about these things than you. Use them. And one of the things that we probably haven't been so good at is the importance of good filing and sharing and keeping your own knowledge base up to date. When you're run by volunteers, many of whom are already retired, some of whom then maybe get health issues, means they can't do as much as they used to, people will move on. And it is very challenging for the new people coming along to work out what's happened in the past, to find out the information they need. So good filing and sharing and cataloguing of the filing is absolutely vital. And recognise that keeping going is going to remain challenging. It's not a one-off. It's not a matter of buying the premises and then you've solved your problems. New challenges are going to arise. A lot of energy will be required on an ongoing basis, but it is worth it. What we've been doing in Palnackie has really added a sense of cohesion and community to the village that was in danger of being lost if our final shop and social hub had ended up being closed. Thank you.
Thanks, Jenny. Some really useful tips there for anyone that might be thinking about going down the same road. I think we can open up for questions now. If anyone wants to put questions in the Q&A box at the bottom, I'll direct them to people. There we go. That's the presentation down. So can I invite Jenny, Richard and Cathy to come back onto screen now?
Oh.
I think that you all gave a really good overview of the huge diversity of different things that you can do in a village. While we're waiting for questions to come in, can I ask you all in turn where you think your village would be in like 5 or 10 years time if you hadn't had these community ownership projects? And can I start with you, Cathy?
Where would we be? I think if we hadn't been able to purchase the land, I think there could have been a lot of development of housing, which would not have been affordable housing. It would have been housing for more holidays, and we would have lost a lot of the beach area, car park area, I think, to housing. Maybe more static kind of caravans, so kind of, again, form of housing. And that would have been a big, I think, overdevelopment of the land. So we would have lost the village without generating housing that would enable the young people to be able to stay here, because that's our biggest challenge. That's what fascinated with Richard's about the affordable housing for that they're doing over there.
Can I ask the same question of you then, Richard?
Well, I think if the Community Trust hadn't stepped in, then when the site was sold, where we bought the land, the housing developer would have put some swings and a chute and a few other bits and pieces on there, and maybe planted a few trees and shrubs, but it would have been what the developer managed to persuade the local authority that he could get away with on there, in terms of, but it wouldn't have been driven by the community, and it wouldn't have been owned by the community in that same way, and we wouldn't have had the opportunity to look at some of our other plans if we when we get the funding for our cafe on site and other bits and pieces there, and the opportunities that are there. Now that we own the land, there are opportunities. Without owning the land, without owning the asset, there aren't those opportunities.
Thanks, Richard. Well, good to hear that Palnackie's Community Cafe is going well. Reassuring. And can I ask same with you then, Jenny?
I think if we hadn't purchased the assets, it would have been very challenging to keep the shop going. It is challenging anyway to keep the shop going. It would have been that much more challenging. We wouldn't have a cafe, which has certainly added a lot. I think that premises would have remained empty. That wouldn't be there. And given that the then owner actually wanted to sell up and move, I think there's a good chance that the whole thing, which we didn't know at the time, but there's a good chance that the whole premises would have been sold and potentially all converted to non-affordable housing, which I'm talking hypothetically here, but it is possible that the village could have lost its shop altogether.
Yeah, that does seem to be the way that many shops go if there's not community intervention.
Yeah.
I'll encourage the viewers to be less shy and to come forward with their questions and answers, but I just want to pick up on something that Cathy said about sometimes the developing all these assets can be a bit frightening. And do you think that it brings a different dynamic to it if it's being delivered by a community, that the way that you manage risks and kind of decide on your future development?
I think, I think as everybody said, it's all about, you have to have the community with you for it to go forward. So it doesn't take the risk out of it, but it gives you a bit more confidence to go forward, because you've got that the community coming with you, and that's what the vital thing is. But it's always going to be a bit scary, but you just, if you've got your plans and you know what you've got a clear goal in mind of and your pathway to get there, you can't be rigid in your path, because you do sometimes, you know, COVID hit us all. We all had to go off at a tangent, you know, and do things slightly differently. You need to have flexibility, but you also need to have a strength of conviction to say it's going to happen. And you can't be right. You're not going to please, because you're always going to get people who are going to go, I don't want that, or that's not the way to do it. But you can only go on the knowledge that you get from your experts and your consultation.
Yeah, one of the positive aspects is there is a lot of help out there, and a lot of knowledge within the wider kind of community world.
There's heaps.
Can I ask Richard the same thing?
Sorry, what was the question again?
How you kind of how you manage risk, because a lot of these projects that communities take forward are quite, you know, big in terms of capital. Where do you get the advice from? Like, how does collective decision making contribute to that?
Yeah, I mean, one of the big things for us was when we were considering the affordable housing element, we had the opportunity potentially to develop 6 affordable houses, and we were speaking to Highland Small Community Housing Trust at the time and various others, and also looking at the experience of other communities in terms of developing affordable housing. And we thought there were a lot of risks in that. Taking on the cost of developing 6 houses, it's a huge cost. Then all the difficulties that go with it, you have to have a housing policy for allocation of those houses. If there's a risk that you may end up with if your housing policy is too rigid, then you won't maybe not be able to allocate that house to somebody. And if it's lying empty, you're not getting any income from it. So we identified lots of risks like that, and we took the easy option, if you like, and to de-risk that, and that we did a deal with Cairn Housing who are registered social landlord, so they could develop the site. And the good thing is that the vast majority of the 14 houses, the 6 that we have enabled, plus the ones that the developer put in place, vast majority of those have gone to people who are very local within the Black Isle. So yeah, that's been great. And speaking to the people who have moved in, they are absolutely delighted with the houses that they've moved into, and the community that they're very quickly becoming part of the community within the village. So that's been a huge success. But you're right, lots of risks. One of the biggest risks is that you end up with an asset that you can't develop. And because funding has become so difficult, so tight in terms of and costs, as I think we've all realized, costs have gone through the roof in the last couple of years. It's become much more challenging, but the rewards are pretty spectacular, and just the sense it's a community asset. We own it, it's ours, and we can do what we'd like to with that site, within reason, of course.
Thanks, Richard. I think we've had some gremlins in our chat and Q&A today, but I think the chat is now working. So apologies for telling you all that you were being shy when actually you couldn't type any questions in. I've got a question here for Jenny. Alison is asking about how your shareholder model works. What proportion of shares are owned by the community, and how you sold it as an idea?
We have about 50 shareholders, and shareholders only get 1 vote, however much they own. The shareholders are all only community members, or they could be supporters out with. But basically, we just publicised it within the community, and every now and then we have another bout to try and get people to join again, or to even add a bit to the shares they bought. It can be for any amount, so people can become a shareholder with £5 if they want to, or it could be £500. And it gave us a little bit of working capital, which is useful. The shareholders are kept informed. They're invited to an annual general meeting at the very minimum, but if there are other key issues coming up, we would inform them and potentially get them to vote on key issues. They vote on selecting the board, the committee, though probably like most committees, we don't have any competition about getting in. It's much more about having to twist people's arms. But so we've never actually got to the point where we've had them vetoing anyone on the committee. They don't get any money back. It's not a share that's going to make them any money, but they do get 10% discount on drinks at the cafe. Interestingly, though, everyone's been given a loyalty card to use. Nobody has actually ever used it because I think they all just want to support the cafe. So it's very much about people wanting to support. There is one mistake we made, which we only realised recently, is that we didn't make provision for transfer of shares when we set them up. So we recently had a shareholder who unfortunately died. He was very supportive of the cafe. We suspect that had we ever had the conversation with him, he would have donated the shares to the cafe on this eventuality, but we never had that discussion. So we had the solicitor writing to us. It's not an enormous amount of money, but the solicitor have to do what they do. So that we have the solicitor writing to us. We had to go back to them. Well, what happens to these shares? So we've now set up a system whereby if people move out with the area or unfortunately die, they nominate what they want to happen to their shares. They can either donate them back to the shop so it becomes just part of the capital of the shop, or they can transfer them to somebody else. But that was something we had missed out, hadn't thought about in the initial stages.
Thanks, Jenny. And Community Share Scotland provide excellent support as well to any communities looking at going down the community shares route. It's really fantastic help that you can get from them. Got a question for Richard, asking if the trust receives any ongoing income from the affordable housing, and is there a contribution to the maintenance of the green?
The answer is no and no. It's short answer. No, we actually sold the land to Cairn Housing, so we had a capital receipt for that in terms of the sale of the land. So that's went into our reserve fund, but we own the green, so it's our responsibility to maintain it long term. And like I said, the houses are actually owned and managed by Cairn, both for the affordables and for the private housing. There is a factoring agreement, but we're not part of that in terms of the maintaining the open spaces as part of the housing development. There is also this was one of the lessons for us, if we're talking about lessons learned in any project, dealing with solicitors in terms of the exchanging land, paying for land, contracts was a complete nightmare, especially when you've got 3 lots of our solicitors involved, ours, Tulloch and Cairn. It certainly feels like I aged. I'm actually only 25, aged a lot through that process. It was very, very hard work, but we now have a legal agreement in place in terms of how what the different responsibilities are.
Thanks, Richard. And a question I'll direct to Jenny about how you decided on your housing allocation policies, from Sally, who's wondering about maintaining community fairness and happiness. Do you have any tips?
Well, I think one tip is to outsource it, so you as community members are not seen as the people deciding who's going to live in the shop. So yes, we get rent from the shop. From the cottage behind the shop. It helps support the shop ongoing. We get the rental managed by an estate agent. We pay them to manage it. We do not want to have the day-to-day liaison with the tenant because they're our neighbours, and we don't think that would be very comfortable. We are actually in the process of selecting new tenants. We've been overwhelmed with people applying. The initial selection is going to be done by the social housing body in Dumfries and Galloway, and they have their social housing criteria. So it will be about affordability. It will be about if they're overcrowded. It will be about it's a 3-bedroom house, using the space well. We have been able to add a couple of criteria in that we would like to include, if people have links to the community, that that also gives them some extra points. And also we want to support the primary school. So if people have primary aged kids who will go to the local school, that's also a positive criteria as far as we're concerned. But we are not involved in the shortlisting of the tenants, and we don't wish to be, or the day-to-day management. We don't want that either. We do get the problems coming back to us as a committee. So, if there's problems with the heating or whatever it might be, our previous tenants weren't very keen on the air source heat pump because they weren't used to it. It all comes back to us to deal with, but it goes through the rental agency.
Thanks, Jenny. Richard, do you have anything to add to that in terms of the affordable housing?
Well, as I said, we took the very similar route to Jenny in terms of outsourcing that, but we outsourced it completely in terms of, partly because the development costs, building 6 houses was just going to, that had been best part of £1 million by the time you went through that whole process, and there's just no way we were going to get that kind of funding. I think Jenny's alluded to the fact that you've got to be really careful in terms of housing policy, because you could be seen to be unfair and favouring people. So I think having somebody, a third party managing that, is probably a good idea.
I'd say within our membership, there's probably just an enormous range of different approaches to housing allocation policy, but the most common method is for the community to develop it, and it usually is around the primary school features heavily in a lot of the policies, but most of our members do outsource it because it just takes away the personal element. You're not going to sit in the pub or meet someone in the shop who you might have turned down for a house. So yeah. A question from Meg. You've all spoken about the learning curve of the projects. Can you talk a little about how you're capturing that learning and sharing it forward? So can I come to you, Cathy? Are you learning and dumping the information, or are you able to kind of capture it and share it as you're going along?
Well, a bit of both. I think what's, a lot of, especially when it's a funded project, that's part of your funding usually, is you have to document what's happened and what's worked well, what hasn't. So that's a very good place to start building up your library. And then, just taking the motorhome park and stopover in Findhorn, we did up a little case study, and it's got the providers and the people that we spoke to and the people who worked with us, and just the pitfalls that we had and the successes, just as little case studies that we, to build up in your library, and having that library of contractors, and both kind of the physical work contractors, but also the network of people within the area who have supported you through advice, through picking up the phone and crying down the phone to them, going, I don't know what to do with this, what should I do? And I don't know whether it's all right to say, Lindsay, about Scotto that I mentioned before the call. I don't know how many on the webinar today have heard of Scotto. It came out of Highland and Island Enterprises Tourism Academy that they've had various cohorts for. And it's all about community tourism, and how local communities are getting more involved, and how visitors to Scotland particularly are looking for more experiential holidays. And so to come to your cafe, Jenny, and see that that is what Scotto is about, coming to the cafe and and then our holiday home fits into our holiday park fits into that. So it's a really good networking organisation. If anybody needs information on it, I'm sure I can point you in the right direction. And it's sharing of that knowledge, I think, is the best way forward. You know, if somebody phones up and says, you know, we get it all the time, you know, how did you do that? You know, no qualms. And I think that's from communities to be able to share that with others, and a willingness to say, well, this is what we did. This is what it cost us when we did it. These are our providers. We can do an introduction to a provider for you. I was at the Scottish conference. A lot of people were taken aback the fact that I was quite open about saying, well, we spent this and this and that, and this is what we got in. There's nothing to hide. You can go on the company website and see it. You can go to the company's houses or Oscar and see what your income is. So it's all about sharing that knowledge across the network through, you know, Community Land Scotland, through Land for any organisation. It's providing them with a little case study is one of the best ones, because I'm being happy to speak to others who are going through the same thing or a similar thing.
Thanks, Cathy. Richard, how have you found that process?
Yeah, I think there are a couple of things that I would mention in terms of what we've learned, but I mean, Meg's question is really about capturing that and sharing it. There isn't really a sort of central resource to capture that information. Webinars like this are great to be able to share your experience. Otherwise, it does often feel like you're on your own, that nobody else is experiencing the problems that you've got, and it can feel quite isolating at times. But having a forum that you're able to put, you know, explain to people some of the issues, and then they can see that they are not unique in any way at all. So I think that would be a useful thing. What are we learning through the process? Yeah, I think one of the things that we've learned through the process, and I think it's you learn the hard way in a lot of these circumstances, is consultants will offer you the world and promise you absolutely everything, and their delivery is perhaps for their vision for your community, but it's not your vision. So I think developing your ideas in-house as far as possible is a really important thing, and don't just depend on what consultants tell you, because they will tell you what worked for the last project they were involved with, but it doesn't mean it'll work for your project. So yeah, a pinch of salt, I would say a bag of salt, or in terms of what consultants say to you. But yeah, capturing these sort of things it is quite difficult to do that kind of sharing, unless you've got a forum like this to do it.
Thanks, Richard. I think there's a fair amount of nodding of heads there. I think one thing we always say to communities is don't assume everything a consultant tells you is correct, and it can be really useful to run what a consultant tells you past the community that's already doing something. So for a community shop, you know, sending your business plan to another community shop, and they will soon find the holes in it. On that note, can I ask you, Jenny, the same question?
Remind me what the question was.
Like capturing and sharing learning.
Sharing learning, yeah. Challenging. I mean, time is our biggest challenge. You know, we've got a committee. We all put a lot of time in anyway to the shop. We've all got other things going on. A lot of us volunteer behind the till in the shop, you know, and finding extra time to also document and share information is really challenging. It was I mentioned that we had a development worker who helped us with the actual sort of purchase and the managing of the project of purchasing, refurbishing and so on. And we put into her remit was capturing information, which was vital. So she actually set up quite a good database, which is on Dropbox. All the committee have access to it. Of course, keeping up to date is a challenge. So when I was preparing for this talk, I went back into Dropbox. I managed to find some of the information. I couldn't find all of the information. I wasn't the chair at the time this happened. Fortunately, we still have the chair at the time this happened, but a lot of the information is still in people's heads, and it is difficult to find time to document it fully because we're all busy doing too many other things already. And the top priority is the day-to-day running of the shop. So that is an ongoing challenge, and it will remain an ongoing challenge. That's where it's really, really helpful when organisations do allow you to get a little bit of paid time in, because to expect volunteers to, do everything plus all the documentation and is a really big ask. We're going to face a big challenge again when we transition with our shop manager, because we have a paid shop manager, and though we have volunteers in the shop, we rely on the shop manager to do an awful lot of things that, again, are her knowledge base, and she wants to retire at the end of this year. It's going to be a big challenge shifting to a new shop manager. So, these things are really important, but very difficult.
Yeah, I think it is a big challenge for the whole sector, and I think community ownership world is full of people who like to get things done as well, and they end up becoming very, very busy doing all the things that need to be done. Well, I'm just waiting to see if we get any last questions, and I just highlight the Community Learning Exchange the Scottish Community Alliance runs. If you can manage to get a day out of your time and you want to go and visit another community that's doing something that your community wants to do in the future, and they can fund study visits, and importantly, they also fund a hosting visit for their time spent hosting the study visit. I think that's all the questions now. If anyone has got a question that appears in their brain after this webinar, I'm sure our presenters would be happy to answer the questions, so just get in touch with us. I'd like to say a massive thank you to our three presenters, each of which has provided very interesting presentations and has answered the questions very well. And I would like to say a huge thank you to our audience today as well. As I said, hopefully we'll have this webinar up on our YouTube channel next week if there's anyone else you would like to share it with. So a big thank you to everybody. Goodbye.
Thank you.